185,000 soldiers could not defeat this angel. One of the greatest stories in the Bible. Hezekiah's ascension to the throne was nothing short of a new dawn for Judah. At the tender age of 25, he stepped into leadership, eager to erase the dark marks of his father Ahaz's reign. Full of hope and guided by his devout mother Abi, he aimed to restore the sanctity of his kingdom. Hezekiah wasn't just planning a few reforms. He was on a divine mission to return Judah to its former glory, aligning with the ways of his ancestor David, as described in 2 Kings 18:3. He did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. But here's where our plot thickens. Just as Hezekiah was setting his grand plans into motion, the shadow of the Assyrian Empire loomed large. Imagine this: Sennacherib, king of Assyria, with his vast, formidable army, ready to swallow Judah whole. The stakes couldn't be higher, but Hezekiah's resolve was unshakable. Faced with seemingly insurmountable odds, he turned not to allies or arms, but to his faith. He prayed, and Isaiah the prophet brought words of divine assurance. Yet, the true miracle was yet to unfold. On the eve of what seemed like certain doom, an angel of the Lord descended upon the Assyrian camp. Not a single sword was drawn by Judah, not a single arrow fired. Yet by the morning light, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers lay dead. Divine judgment delivered overnight. Surprise! It was the angel, not an army, that saved Jerusalem. Fresh from his coronation and fueled by unshakable faith, Hezekiah wasted no time in tackling one of the most pressing issues of his reign, the widespread idolatry that had seeped into Judah during previous administrations. This young king, a stark contrast to his father Ahaz, set about his royal duties with a zeal for purity that hadn't been seen since the days of David. But here's where our narrative takes an exciting turn. Hezekiah didn't just order reforms, he personally led them. Picture this: the king himself walking through the streets of Jerusalem, tearing down altars to Baal, cutting through the sacred groves where illicit worship was conducted, and smashing the brazen serpent that Moses had made, which had become an idol. His actions weren't just about obedience. They were a passionate declaration that Judah was to serve Yahweh alone. Pause and reflect on the significance of these actions. Hezekiah was not merely cleaning up a few old shrines, he was waging a spiritual revolution. How intense must his conviction have been to dismantle centuries-old symbols of worship, knowing well that many of his subjects would resist. It's a poignant moment, illustrating the loneliness of leadership when it's driven by conviction. With each idol that fell, the king's resolve grew stronger. But Hezekiah's reforms extended beyond physical symbols. They were a call to his people to renew their covenant with God. He reinstated the Passover, a festival long neglected, drawing people from not only Judah but also rebellious Israel to celebrate it. This was not just a religious ceremony, it was a powerful, unifying event, a reclaiming of cultural identity and divine protection. The political atmosphere around Judah began to shift dramatically. While the internal spiritual revival blossomed, external threats started closing in, setting the stage for what would become a defining period in Hezekiah's rule. It wasn't just about religious renewal now, the very survival of Judah was at stake. As Hezekiah strengthened his nation's spiritual foundations, Assyria, the regional superpower, was on a relentless expansion campaign under the rule of the formidable King Sennacherib. Assyria had already swallowed up many smaller kingdoms and was eyeing Judah with predatory interest. Imagine this: a colossal empire known for its ruthless military tactics and its scorched earth policy, ready to pounce on the small but spiritually rejuvenated Judah. Hezekiah, aware of the looming Assyrian threat, undertook significant preparations. He didn't just pray and hope, he acted with strategic foresight. Hezekiah fortified Jerusalem, rebuilding all the broken sections of the wall. erecting towers and constructing a second wall outside the first. He also secured the city's water supply by building a tunnel that diverted the waters of the Gihon spring into the city, ensuring that even during a siege, Jerusalem would have access to water. The spectre of Assyrian aggression grew larger. Sennacherib, the ambitious and ruthless king of Assyria, was quickly establishing himself as a force to be reckoned with across the ancient Near East. Under his reign, Assyria expanded its borders through relentless military campaigns, bringing destruction and subjugation to rebellious vassal states. Imagine the terror and despair that gripped the smaller kingdoms as news of Assyria's conquests spread. Sennacherib's reputation was built on the ruins of cities and the screams of the conquered. His approach was not just to defeat, but to obliterate any hint of resistance, making examples of those who dared defy Assyrian might. Cities were sacked, populations were deported, and rulers were replaced with Assyrian loyalists. But here's where the story of Hezekiah intersects with the relentless march of Assyrian power. Despite the obvious danger, Hezekiah stood as a beacon of defiance. After years of paying tribute, Hezekiah made a bold decision to stop these payments, directly challenging Sennacherib's authority. This wasn't just a political maneuver, it was a statement of faith, signaling that Judah would no longer bow to foreign gods or kings, because their trust was in Yahweh alone. Surrounded by nations that had fallen like dominoes to Assyria, Judah, under Hezekiah's rule, chose a different path. How risky was this move? It was a gamble that put not just his kingdom at risk, but also the lives of all his people. As tensions escalated, Sennacherib turned his attention toward this small but stubborn kingdom of Judah. His response was swift and brutal. An immense army was dispatched to quell Judah's rebellion and capture its fortified capital, Jerusalem. The stage was set for a showdown of epic proportions. As Sennacherib's Assyrian forces began their relentless advance, their reputation for ruthlessness preceded them, spreading fear across the region. City after city fell into their hands as they methodically dismantled any semblance of resistance. The Assyrians were not just conquerors, they were destroyers, intent on erasing the very identity of those they subdued. But the narrative takes a particularly gripping turn as the Assyrian army approaches Jerusalem. Hezekiah, having already made his bold stand against paying tribute, now faced the ultimate test. The Assyrian war machine, efficient and merciless, reached the very gates of Jerusalem, ready to crush this audacious kingdom that dared defy the might of Sennacherib. Imagine the scene: the massive Assyrian encampment surrounding the walled city, siege ramps being built, the air thick with tension. Inside Jerusalem, the people were no doubt gripped by a mix of fear and faith. They had prepared as best as they could, following Hezekiah's lead, fortifying walls, securing water supplies, and bolstering their spirits with prayers and prophecies. Sennacherib, confident of his impending victory, sent emissaries to Jerusalem with a message not just of war, but of psychological warfare. The Assyrian representatives called out to the people of Jerusalem in their own language, trying to sow doubt and fear. They mocked the God of Israel, claiming that no god of any nation they had conquered had been able to stand against the mighty Assyrian army. How, they asked, could Yahweh be any different? The people of Jerusalem, standing atop their walls, looking down at an enemy that had laid waste to much of the known world, had to decide where their faith truly lay. Was their God, Yahweh, truly powerful enough to save them from this seemingly inevitable doom? The siege of Jerusalem intensified, not just through military might, but through a calculated campaign of psychological warfare. Sennacherib, confident in the unstoppable power of his army, aimed to break the spirit of Jerusalem's defenders before the city walls ever fell. He sent his chief spokesperson, the Rabshakeh, to deliver a chilling message directly to the people and King Hezekiah. The Rabshakeh, Standing just outside the walls of Jerusalem, his voice carrying clearly to the anxious ears of the city's inhabitants, he called on the people of Jerusalem to listen to the words of the great king, the king of Assyria. The message was cunning and clear: surrender and live comfortably in your own land for a little while longer, or resist and be destroyed. The Rabshakeh didn't just threaten with words of siege and conquest. He questioned the reliability of their God. He mocked their faith, proclaiming that no god of any other nation had succeeded in resisting Assyria. "What makes you think your God Yahweh can deliver you?" he taunted. His words were a poison aimed to seep into the hearts of Jerusalem's defenders and sow seeds of doubt and fear. How daunting it must have been for the people of Jerusalem, hearing the might of Assyria articulated so confidently, witnessing the scorn heaped upon their faith. The psychological assault was as formidable as the physical threat posed by the Assyrian legions waiting at their gates. But Hezekiah's response to this dire threat showcases his leadership and faith. Instead of capitulating to fear, he sought to strengthen the resolve of his people. He reminded them of the power of their God and the prophecies that spoke of divine deliverance. Hezekiah's faith did not waver. Instead, it became a beacon for his people in this dark time. As the psychological assault from Sennacherib's emissaries echoed off the walls of Jerusalem, King Hezekiah took decisive action to bolster the city's defenses and the spirits of its people. Understanding the severity of the Assyrian threat, he moved swiftly, implementing practical and spiritual strategies to prepare for the looming siege. Hezekiah's preparations were thorough and multifaceted. He ordered the construction of a broad wall to fortify the already strong defenses of Jerusalem. This wall was not just a physical barrier, it was a symbol of determination and resilience. He also oversaw the building of an innovative water tunnel, now known as Hezekiah's Tunnel, which ingeniously redirected the waters of the Gihon Spring away from the Assyrian forces and into the city, securing a vital water supply for the duration of the siege. But Hezekiah's leadership extended beyond these practical defenses. He understood the importance of maintaining morale and faith among his people. He convened community leaders, priests and prophets, encouraging them to trust in God's promises of protection. He reminded them of the words of the prophets Isaiah and Micah, who had foretold God's deliverance and had condemned the arrogance of Assyria. As the Assyrian threats intensified outside the walls of Jerusalem, Hezekiah faced one of the gravest crises of his reign. The psychological and physical siege tactics employed by Sennacherib threatened not just the city's survival, but also the spiritual resilience of its inhabitants. In this critical moment, Hezekiah turned to Isaiah, the prophet, seeking divine guidance and reassurance. Hezekiah's decision to consult Isaiah underscores the depth of his faith. Isaiah was not only a prophet, but a trusted advisor whose words had guided the kings of Judah through tumultuous times. Hezekiah sent a delegation to Isaiah clothed in sackcloth as a sign of humility and desperation. This gesture reflected the seriousness of the situation and the king's acknowledgement that only divine intervention could save Jerusalem from the impending doom. Isaiah's response to Hezekiah's plea was both immediate and powerful. He reassured the king that the Assyrians would not succeed in their conquest. "Thus says the Lord, do not be afraid of the words you have heard, with which the servants of the king of Assyria have blasphemed me. Behold, I will put a spirit in him, so that he shall hear a rumor and return to his own land, and I will make him fall by the sword in his own land," Isaiah prophesied. As Jerusalem braced against the impending siege, the words of Isaiah brought a powerful surge of hope and affirmation to Hezekiah and his people. Isaiah's prophecy was not only a reassurance, but a bold declaration of divine intervention that promised a miraculous deliverance from the Assyrian threat. In his message, Isaiah detailed that the Assyrians would not shoot an arrow, throw a spear, or even shield against Jerusalem. Instead, they would hear a rumor, become frightened, and retreat to their land where disaster would befall them. This prophecy was profound. It directly contradicted the visible reality of a mighty Assyrian army ready to besiege the city. It tested the depth of Judah's faith against the stark fear imposed by their enemies. Impact of these prophetic words on the citizens of Jerusalem. Surrounded by a seemingly invincible force, the promise that these aggressors would not even launch a single attack against their walls would have seemed unbelievable. Yet Isaiah's words offered a vision of the future that transcended the grim present, bolstering the city's morale and fortifying their resolve. Hezekiah, armed with this divine assurance, continued his preparations for the siege, reinforcing not just the city's physical defenses but also the spiritual defenses by encouraging prayer and reliance on Yahweh. The king's actions and Isaiah's words created a powerful synergy that galvanized the people, preparing them for whatever might come, secure in the belief that their deliverance was assured. As the siege of Jerusalem intensified, the Assyrian encampment around the city became a grim testament to Sennacherib's determination to conquer Judah. The vast army, complete with siege engines and soldiers, encircled Jerusalem, their presence a constant reminder of the looming threat. Yet, within the city walls, fortified by Isaiah's prophecy, Hezekiah and his people clung to their faith amidst growing tension. The Assyrians, confident in their military prowess and the fear they instilled, continued their psychological warfare, shouting threats and blasphemies, attempting to undermine the confidence of Jerusalem's defenders. But the scene inside Jerusalem was one of cautious hope. Every day that passed without an attack reinforced the belief in the prophetic words that their city would not fall by Assyrian hands. The tension around Jerusalem reached a critical point as the siege continued, with the Assyrian army encircling the city, confident in their impending victory. Yet the anticipated attack never came. Instead, the night brought with it a divine intervention so astounding that it would be remembered throughout history as a testament to the power of God's protection. According to the biblical narrative, as the inhabitants of Jerusalem slept, an angel of the Lord descended upon the Assyrian camp. In a single, devastating act, 185,000 Assyrian soldiers were struck down, not by human hands, but by a celestial force beyond comprehension. Morning light revealed a scene of divine judgment. The once formidable Assyrian army lay decimated, their plans of conquest turned to ashes. Imagine the awe and profound relief that swept through Jerusalem upon discovering the fate of their besiegers. The people who had braced for destruction instead found their enemy vanquished by the hand of God, just as Isaiah had prophesied. This miraculous event did not just signify a military victory. It was a powerful affirmation of their unwavering faith in the face of overwhelming odds. Pause and reflect on the magnitude of this intervention. The streets of Jerusalem, once filled with the echoes of Assyrian threats, now resounded with prayers of gratitude and awe. The psychological warfare, the fear, and the tension dissolved into a renewed faith in the power and protection of their God. But the narrative does not end with the miraculous downfall of the Assyrian soldiers. The impact of this event reverberated beyond the walls of Jerusalem, affecting the course of regional politics and the spiritual lives of the Judeans. Sennacherib, the king of Assyria, humiliated and defeated, retreated to his capital, where he would later meet his end, assassinated by his own sons. This outcome not only fulfilled Isaiah's prophecy, but also marked a significant shift in Assyrian policy towards Judah. The morning after the angel of the Lord struck down 185,000 Assyrian soldiers was a turning point not only for Jerusalem, but for the entire region. The citizens of Jerusalem awoke to find that the mighty Assyrian army, which had threatened their very existence, had been decimated overnight. This profound miracle sent shockwaves through Judah and beyond, reshaping their perception of divine power and their place in the geopolitical landscape. Imagine the mix of awe and relief as Hezekiah and his people ventured outside the city walls, only to see the ground littered with the bodies of their enemies. The fear that had gripped their hearts turned to jubilation as they realized the extent of the miracle they had witnessed. The impact of this event cannot be overstated. It was not just a military victory, but a divine declaration of Yahweh's protection over his people. But the story of the Assyrian retreat does not end with their defeat outside Jerusalem. Sennacherib, the once feared king of Assyria, returned to his capital in Nineveh, a broken man. His campaign against Judah, which had seemed a sure victory, ended in ignominy. The psychological impact on Sennacherib and his empire was profound. He was assassinated by his own sons, a fulfillment of Isaiah's prophecy that he would fall by the sword in his own land. This dramatic end underscored the divine judgment against him and served as a cautionary tale of the consequences of defying the God of Israel. For Judah, it was a reaffirmation of their national identity and their covenant with Yahweh. It bolstered their status among neighboring nations who saw in Judah not just a small kingdom but a nation under the powerful patronage of an omnipotent deity. This event likely influenced regional politics, as other nations recognized the divine favor bestowed upon Judah. After the miraculous deliverance of Jerusalem and the devastating loss of his army, Sennacherib's return to Assyria was marked by disgrace and disbelief. The once mighty conqueror, who had terrorized nations with his military prowess, faced a humbling journey back to Nineveh. This dramatic reversal of fortune not only affected Sennacherib personally, but also had profound implications for the Assyrian Empire. Sennacherib, defeated and dishonored, entered his capital. The news of the supernatural destruction of his army had preceded him, spreading doubt and fear among his people and diminishing his image as an invincible ruler. The morale of the Assyrian Empire, built on the perceived invincibility of its army and the supposed favor of its gods, was severely undermined. The narrative of Sennacherib's assassination by his own sons, as prophesied by Isaiah, adds a poignant layer to this story of divine justice. The betrayal within his own family not only ended his reign, but also served as a stark reminder of the biblical principle that those who live by the sword shall perish by it. This act of regicide occurred in a setting where Sennacherib was most vulnerable, in his own temple, suggesting a divine irony. The very place where he might have sought safety became the stage for his downfall. The miraculous events surrounding the deliverance of Jerusalem and the downfall of Sennacherib left an indelible mark on the legacy of King Hezekiah. His reign, once threatened by the mightiest army of his time, ended not only in military survival, but in a profound spiritual reaffirmation for Judah. This period of history did not just showcase divine intervention, but also highlighted the role of faith and wise leadership in overcoming insurmountable odds. Hezekiah's faith, tested in the crucible of Assyrian aggression, emerged stronger, setting a benchmark for biblical kingship. His efforts to restore true worship and trust in God, his initiative in fortifying Jerusalem, and his resilience in the face of existential threats cultivated a legacy of devout leadership. Under his reign, Judah experienced not only physical preservation, but also a spiritual revival that would influence future generations. The impact on the people of Judah, witnessing their king's steadfast faith, resulting in such a dramatic deliverance. Hezekiah's legacy was one of hope, courage, and the power of faith in God. It reinforced the idea that divine protection was intimately linked to the righteousness and faithfulness of the nation and its leaders. The survival of Jerusalem against Assyria was a story that would be told and retold, each time affirming the nation's special covenant with God. This narrative helped to mold the national consciousness, embedding a deep sense of divine destiny and protection in the cultural and religious fabric of the people. But the story of Hezekiah and the angelic deliverance also posed important questions about the nature of faith and divine justice. How do such events shape our understanding of God's involvement in human affairs? How do they influence our responses to contemporary challenges?